Hello students, welcome back to our channel, and in this video we will discuss about the critical essay written by T.S. Eliot in 1919, Tradition and Individual Talent. So basically we will talk about the summary for T.S. Eliot talks about the relationship between the individual poet or author and the canon of literature that precedes the poet. Eliot argues that great poets are not simply original but are in conversation with the literary tradition. He also suggests that the poet role is not to express personal emotion but rather to serve as a medium for the collective emotions of the mind of Europe. So, in his essay, he outlines several things: tradition and the individual talent of the poet, tradition, elements, and their significance, the literary tradition, the dynamic concept of tradition, the function and sense of tradition of literature, emotions and feeling of a poet, and poetry as an organization. This is the manifesto of Eliot's critical creed and was first published in 1990 in Times Literary Supplement as critical article. And the seeds which has been sown here come to fruition in subsequent essays. It is a declaration of Eliot's critical creed, and these principles are the basis of all his subsequent criticism. So this essay divided into three parts. The first part gives us Eliot concept of tradition about the literature, and in the second part is developed his theory of the impersonality of poetry, and in short the third part is in the nature of conclusion or summing up of whole discussion. He talks about traditional elements and the significance. A tradition is generally regarded as a word of censure. It is a word disagreeable to the English ears. When the English praise a poet, they praise him for those aspects of his work which are individual and original, and it is supposed that his chief merit list lies in such part. This undue stress on individuality shows that the English have an uncritical turn of mind and they praise the poet for the wrong thing. Whereas if we approach the poet without this prejudice, we shall often find that not only the best but the most individual part of his work may be those in which the dead poet, his ancestors, assert their immortality most vigorously. So, in we talk about the literary tradition, which in ways in which it can be acquired. Tradition does not mean the blind adherence to the ways of the previous generation. This would be a mere slavish imitation or a mere repetition of what has already been achieved, and novelty is better than repetition. Tradition, in the sense of passive repetition, is to be discouraged for idiots. Tradition is a matter of much wider significance, and a true sense of a term cannot be inherited. It can only be obtained by hard labor. This labor is the labor of knowing the past writers, and the historical sense involves a perception not only of the pastness of the past but also of the present. Then he talked about the dynamic conception of tradition and its value. To judge the work of a poet of an artist, we must compare and contrast his work with the work of poet artists in the past. And the concept of tradition is dynamic one, and it is a relationship between the past and a present. It is not one-sided. It is a reciprocal relationship, and existing monuments form an ideal ordeal among themselves, which is modified by introduction of new really work of art among them. He says that every great poet, Dante or Shakespeare, adds something to the literary tradition out of which the future poetry will be written. Then he talks about the function of tradition. The work of a poet in the present is to be compared and contrasted with the work of past and judged by the standard of the past. But this judgment does not mean determining good or bad. It does not mean deciding whether the present work is better or worse than work of the past. This comparison is reciprocal, and past help us to understand the present, and the present throws the light on the past. So it is in this way alone that we can form an idea of what is really individual and new. It is by comparison alone that we can sieve the traditional from the individual element in the given work of art. So, according the sense of tradition, according to him, the past must be examined critically and not only significant in it should be acquired. And the sense of tradition does not also mean that the poet should know only a few poets whom he admires. A sense of tradition, in a real sense, mean a consciousness of the main current, which does not all flow invariably through the most distinguished reputations. In other words, to know the tradition, the poet must judge critically what are the main trends and what are not. He must confine himself to the main trends and to the exclusion of all that is incidental or tropical. The poet must possess critical gift in ample measure. Then he talk about the work of art, their permanence. Poets must also realize that art never improves, though its material is never the same. The mind of Europe may change, but does not mean the great writers like Shakespeare have grown outdated and lost their significance. There may be refinement and there may be development, but from the point of view of the artist, there is no improvement. So it will not be correct to say that the art of Shakespeare that is better and higher than that of Eliot. Their works are different, different kinds of work. For the material on which they work was different and their thoughts were different. Then he talk about the awareness of the past and the poet's duty to acquire it. It is based on the consciousness of the criticism that will be made of his theory of tradition, and his view of tradition requires that it will be said ridiculous amount of erudition. It will be pointed out that there have been great poets who were not learned, and further that too much learning kills sensibility. However, knowledge does not merely mean bookish knowledge, and the capacity for acquiring knowledge differs from person to person. And it is the duty of every poet to acquire and to the best of his ability his knowledge of the past, and he must continue to acquire this consciousness throughout his career. Then he talks about impersonality of poetry, extinction of personality. The artist must continually surrender himself to something which is more valuable than himself. He must allow his poetic sensibility to be shaped and modified. His self, his individuality may assert itself, but as his powers mature, there must be a greater extinction of personality. He must acquire greater objectivity. His emotions and passions must be dispersonalized. He must be impersonal and objective as a scientist. The personality of artist is not important. The important thing is his sense of tradition. And good poem is a living whole of all poetry that has been ever been written. Thus, a poet's personality is merely a medium having a significance as a catalytic agent or a receptacle in which a chemical reaction takes place. Then he says about the poetic power process and the analogy of the catalyst. He compares mind of the poet to catalyst and the process of poetic creation to the process of chemical reaction. Then he throws certain lights on the mind of the poet is like a catalytic agent and it is necessary for new combination of emotions and experience to take place. Then he talks about the emotions and feelings of the poet to experiences in the poetic process. There may be two kinds. They are emotions and feelings. Poetry may be composed out of emotions only or out of feelings only or out of both. Then he talks about the poetry as organization and intensity of a poetic process. And he next compares poet's mind to a jar or a susceptible in which are stored numberless feelings, emotion, etc. T.S. Eliot thus reject romantic subjectivism in this. Then he talk about the artistic emotion, the value of concentration. The emotion of poetry is different from the personal emotion of the poet, and his personal emotion may be simple or crude, but the emotions of his poetry may be complex and refined. It is the mistaken notion that the poet must express new emotions and result in which eccentricity in poetry. It is not the business of the poet to find new emotions. He may express only ordinary emotion, but he must impart them a new significance and a new meaning. And it is not necessary that they should be his personal emotion. Even emotions which he has never personally experienced can serve the purpose of poetry. So emotion which result from reading book can serve this turn. Then he lastly say that poetry an escape from personality and personal emotion. It is not turning loose of emotion, but an escape from the emotion. It is not the expression of personality, but an escape from the personality. And Eliot does not deny personality or emotion to the poet. Only he must dispersonalize his emotion. There should be an extinction of his personality. This impersonality can be achieved only when the poet surrenders himself completely to the work that is to be done, and the poet can know what is to be done if he acquires a sense of tradition and the historic sense which make him conscious not only of the present but also of the present moment of the past, and not only of what is dead but of what is already living. So I hope you understand the main subject point and key points of this critical essay written by T.S. Eliot. I hope you like my video, so please share and subscribe to my channel, and thank you for watching. Thank you.